on the sin of slavery, which has so long been a curse to this nation. Elder Kimball, my question to you is, why was Ellen White so fearlessly able to so fearlessly voice her displeasure on the issue of slavery and the way whites were treating blacks?
Okay, so you got him with the admin password. Okay. Okay. No problem. Okay.
Instincts and womanly passion. She felt called of God, and she was determined to do whatever necessary in order to advance God's cause. She was truly anointed of God. When I revisit Martin King's speech down there at the mall in Washington, and he talks about, I may not get there with you. How could he stand up there and advance that message? How could he do it? And now we are now hearing, and I have to thank Dr. Baker for this, that last trilogy that he added on the end was not a part of his original message, but one of his guests on the DS said, Martin, tell him about the vision. And he goes off into this antiphonal chant about mine eyes have seen the glory. Something more than humanity is at work here. And I think we see this in the ministry of Ellen White. She was an anointed prophetess to the nation. And I believe that that's where her strength came from.
Dr. Baker, Ellen White was a stalwart champion for the rights, freedoms, and salvation of African Americans. And yet, there are some African Americans who are convinced that she was a racist. Why?
Like I said earlier, Pastor, her writings, and Elder Kimball said so much already. When Edson White and Will Palmer and the Southern Missionary Society went south down the Mississippi on the boat Morning Star, Edson began a correspondence with his mother in Australia. And he was sort of on the ground, as it were. He was a player in this whole drama in the South. And it was by no means the first, but it was one of the most significant. It was the first significant evangelistic forays in the Southland by a Seventh-day Adventist. Of course, there were others before, but I think because of Edson's stature as Ellen White's son and the drama and the epicness of taking a boat down, of assembling a team and taking a boat down for purposes of mobility, because they anticipated what was going to happen in the Jim Crow South. They knew they were going to have to be mobile and move. They knew that they could take people onto the boat and teach them there, and that they wouldn't get ostracized and persecuted like they would on land. And so they anticipated all this. And so Edson began, but they still ran into trouble. there was extreme turbulence. And so Edson was writing his mother in Australia. And I believe that her motherly instincts were seriously kicking in, because Edson's wife, Emma, she contracted malaria, and others were getting sick. In fact, she had to spend a lot of time in Michigan and other places because they weren't used to the mosquitoes and the heat. And other members of the Southern Missionary Society were facing persecution. They were castigated in the newspapers for being integrationists and for carrying these, liberal northern views of race. And of course, there was the whole issue of, a black man's around a white woman. So sexuality is mixed in there. And Ellen White was receiving these reports from her son in Australia. And as a mother, she wanted to protect him and the Southern Missionary Society and everyone involved. But I think primarily she wanted the gospel to be preached. And she knew, as eventually happened, I think it was 1899, that they would eventually get kicked out of the South of a certain city, and they go from city to city, but that they would eventually get kicked out if they tried to observe what she originally said in 1889 and in 1891, where don't pay any attention to any color line. Because she said things like, would Jesus say to the black brother, you can't sit here? And so she said, there's no gospel of Christ in this. The gospel of Christ says we're all journeying to the same heaven. And black and white and the Asian man and everyone's name is written in the book of life next to each other. She said, God sees no color. Heaven sees no color. And so she was saying all this, but then when her son went down south and she saw the realities, and by the way, I think that it even got worse, right, as time went on, because she did predict race wars. She said, she said, I fear that it was like W.E.B. Du Bois and Souls of Black Folks. She said, I fear the color line will always be an issue. I think it will always be an issue. And so this was getting worse. And so she saw race wars and she said the South will close and all of this. But she wrote her son. And from that, from the late 1890s, 1900s, where she wrote the 9th volume of the Testimonies, she changes her counsel. It changes for evangelism and for the safety of the Adventist workers down south. It changes. And when we're reading those today, our thought is, how could you capitulate on race and equality for any reason? For any reason. That's our mindset now. How could you do it for any reason? Even spreading the gospel. But she was a pragmatic, Matthew 24:14, this gospel must be preached. I want everyone to have the gospel. She would do what needed to be done temporarily to get it out. Now, once you know that, you can say whatever you want about her. You understand what I'm saying?